So far we've just been putting our code out in the open. We haven't really been grouping it up, but that's something that you're going to want to do with functions. So a function is just a way of taking all this blob here and just putting it into one nice little command. So you're taking multiple commands and squishing them into one. So how you're going to do that is you're going to write out the word function. So just like letter if, it's going to highlight. And you actually get to name the function whatever you want. Now normally you're going to want to name it based on what you're doing. So right here I'm printing out a whole bunch of things to do with weather. So let's call this something like display weather. And you're going to have these smooth brackets here. Then you're also going to have curly brackets. So that's what it's going to look like without anything inside of it. And again, just for readability, we are going to put the curly brackets down here, which allows us to put everything inside and indented. So I could actually just copy and paste all of this and put it right inside the function. So that is a lot more professional looking. We've got a function called display weather, and inside that we're going to print out all the different aspects of weather. So if I was to run this, it's actually not going to work. Nothing is going to run, and we're not going to see any of the weather. Now the reason for that is what we're doing here is we're actually declaring the function. So there's two things. There's called declaring and there's calling the function. So declaring, which is what we're doing here, is just saying this function exists and this is what it should do. But we're just saying what it should do, not that it should actually run. So if you want to actually run this function, you're going to have to call it out. So you're going to just write it, display weather, and you also need smooth brackets and then a semicolon. So here we don't need these curly brackets because the function already knows what to do inside of it. So we just have to call display weather with the smooth brackets. So now if I click run, we are going to get the 4 things printed out, which is what's happening inside of here. Now the cool thing about this is I can just do that really quickly over and over if I need to, or whenever I want, right? So if I was to do it twice for whatever reason, rather than having to copy this out twice, I just have to write these out twice. So there you can see it actually did 8 messages this time because it just did this twice. So that's what a function does. It lets you group things up and it lets you just call it really quickly. And you can also minimize these. So when your code gets really long, you can just minimize all that stuff inside and you just have this one nice little line that says display weather. So you know that on line 7 we have a function called display weather. And then if you want to tinker around with it or change some stuff, you can always open it back up. So that's just going to be a nice little organizational tool when you have a whole bunch of different functions. Okay, so this is a pretty basic function. Normally you wouldn't do something like this though. You wouldn't just input a global variable into the function. Now there are cases where you could. Again, there's no necessarily right or wrong. It's just what you're trying to achieve. But what's a better practice for this particular example would actually be to use local variables. So inside these smooth brackets, we can declare variables just like we're doing up here. All right, so I'm saying there's a variable called global temperature, another called global condition, and so on. So let's say I want to have a local variable, and that's just going to be specific to this function. So outside of these brackets here, nobody is actually going to understand what this variable means. So it doesn't have to be as wordy. You can do it a little bit more short form because it's a very small area where this variable is going to be understood. So I'm just going to do, let's say, temp con for global condition, wind, and day. So something like that. Again, you can call these whatever you want. And in this case, I just want to have something that represents these variables. Okay, so what I can do now, again, you don't have to call inside here. You don't have to say let or const or anything like that. You can just type out the name of the variable and it's going to automatically assume that you're declaring variables. So now what I can do is I can replace these. So I can say con and wind and day. So the nice thing about this function now is it's very contained. So it has its own local variables and it's printing only local variables. So if I was to start changing stuff out here, let's say I accidentally deleted that, this function is no longer relying on those global variables, which you'll see in a second. So I'm going to keep them for now, but what I can actually do down here is I can just choose whatever 4 things I want to put in. So I can say display weather, let's say the temperature is 10, and let's say the conditions are rainy, and maybe it's 20 for wind, and I don't know, maybe it's Tuesday, something like that. So I can actually just say what I want the variables to be, and those are now going right through into the function, and it's going to print them all out. So let's try that. Let's clear all this, and let's try running it again. So even though I have these global variables up here, they no longer have anything to do with the function. I'm actually just using completely new values that I've just made up, and they're all getting printed out here. But what I can also do is I can plug in variables from other places in my code. So I can still use these if I want to, even though they're separate from the function. So let's try that as well. Let's do display weather. So let's do global temp. Let's do global conditions, global wind, and global day. There we go. So on line 17 here, I'm going to use these variables instead of making up my own. They're going to plug into each one of these spots, which is then going to print out down here. So now we can see the 2. We have that first one that I did, the rainy day on Tuesday. And then down here we have kind of the cold sunny day on Monday. So that's the basics of functions. It's just a way of grouping up information. It's a really handy practice to get into. And it just prevents you from having code kind of hanging around. But very, very useful. So just give that a practice. Try out a few different things. Try different variables. Try doing different things inside of the block. And I'll see you in the next video.